Managing in the Premier League is tough. I mean, just ask Frank Lampard, who took Chelsea from 3rd to 9th and Everton from 16th to 19th, and was promptly sacked from both jobs. Still, it's nice of people to keep offering him new ones, and he's doing what he knows best at Chelsea once again now, losing games of football. I was recently sent this 42-second YouTube short by the distinguished football journalist and YouTube phenomenon that is Thogden, entitled Worst Premier League Manager Ever, ... crying face emoji. There should be 3 dots there really, if an ellipsis was the aim, or just the one if it's meant to be a full stop. Either way, it is a grammatical error from Thogden or whoever uploads his videos for him, but thankfully it's rescued by the beautiful use of an emoji. Admittedly, I don't use them anywhere near enough in my video titles, and that's probably why he's got over 1 million subscribers and I don't. I hate to spoil a Thogden classic for you if you haven't seen it, which ought to be a crime against humanity punishable by death if found guilty in The Hague, but in the video, Thoggers counts down, in his view, the 3 worst managers of the Premier League era. In first place, Thogden went with Les Reed, who lasted just 41 days at Charlton Athletic in 2006, the shortest managerial reign in the history of the Premier League. I will skip over the manager who he put in second because he also makes my 7, and then in third, that's right, the 3rd worst Premier League manager ever according to Thogden, he picked Claudio Ranieri. That is Claudio Ranieri, who guided Leicester City to by far the most extraordinary title win of the Premier League era, in one of the greatest underdog stories in modern sport, in addition to managing Chelsea for 4 seasons, twice qualifying for the Champions League, and finishing as Premier League runners-up in 2003-04, 4 points ahead of Sir Alex Ferguson's Manchester United, and 19 ahead of Gerrard Houllière's Liverpool. Far be it from me to question Thogden, a polymath if ever I've seen one, and a walking encyclopedia when it comes to all things football, but I would point out that Ranieri is one of only 12 managers in the 30-year history of the Premier League to have won the Premier League Manager of the Season award. Admittedly, calling Claudio Ranieri the 3rd worst manager of the Premier League era isn't the worst thing that Thogden has ever done. I don't keep a full abreast of all of his work, I am ashamed to admit, but I would say that shilling for a human rights abusing Qatari regime and perpetuating a misogynistic myth about a man indicted on rape charges were probably worse. But hey, 5.4 million views on that bad boy, so I guess that's gotta be worth it. Anyway, I don't think that Claudio Ranieri is one of the 3 worst managers of the Premier League era, because I don't headbutt brick walls in my spare time, which is the only justification that I can imagine for holding such a view. But I am going to have a go at naming who I actually think are the worst 7. I know, 7. 7 Premier League managers worse than Claudio Ranieri. It is a monumental task, but I'm brave enough to take it on. Without further ado then, here are, in my view, and in my view only, the 7 worst managers of the Premier League era, excluding interim managers because that would just be stupid. 7th, Jan Siewert. Remember him? No? Well, don't feel too bad, no one does. Not even Huddersfield Town fans. Jan Siewert was a Premier League manager relatively recently, in the 2018-19 season, albeit not for long. Brought in to replace David Wagner in January 2019, with Huddersfield bottom of the Premier League table at the time, and a whopping 10 points from safety, he was always on a hiding to nothing. It would have taken a borderline miracle to keep Huddersfield in the Premier League, but nonetheless, Sievert's record was utterly atrocious, and far worse, it must be said, than even David Wagner's before him. Of his 15 Premier League games in charge of Huddersfield, Siewert won a grand total of 1 of them, that victory coming courtesy of a 91st minute winner by Steve Mooney, at home to Wolverhampton Wanderers, which was the only goal of that game. Huddersfield scored 9 goals under Siewert, whilst conceding 36. Don't get me wrong, I know he inherited a rubbish team, but that is pretty spectacularly bad. Given the shoddy situation that he inherited, in which relegation was expected, though perhaps not quite so spectacularly, Huddersfield kept Siewert on in the Championship for all of 3 games, 2 losses and 1 defeat, which saw him swiftly out of the job. Not only did Siewert arrive at a circus, he did so having only managed in first-team football for less than a single season, 3 years earlier, in which he had taken Rot-Weiss Essen into the relegation zone of the 4th tier of German football and been sacked. Huddersfield recruited Siewert from Borussia Dortmund's second team, the same place that they found David Wagner, presumably figuring that it worked out alright with him to begin with, so why not try it again? The wrong man, in the wrong place, and at the wrong time, Siewert is by any measure one of the worst Premier League managers ever, but apparently he did a better job than 2015-16 Premier League title-winning manager Claudio Ranieri. Sorry, I promise I'll let that go, just not yet. 6th, Steven Gerrard. The most controversial inclusion in this 7, I suspect. My hot take is that Steven Gerrard and Frank Lampard, 2 of the Premier League's greatest ever midfielders, are at this point 2 of the league's worst ever managers, and if they hadn't had such glittering playing careers, certainly Lampard would not have been given the jobs that he has done. Gerrard, in fairness, did win the 2020-21 Scottish Premiership title at Rangers, ending Celtic's run of 9 successive league titles. I did hear it said at the time by people more knowledgeable about Scottish football than me, that Gerrard's assistant at Rangers, Michael Beale, was as important, if not even more important to that success than him. Of course, I have no way of verifying or vouching for that, but given Beale's career trajectory without Gerrard, compared to Gerrard's without Beale, it hardly seems that far-fetched. Unlike Lampard, Gerrard has so far had just 1 job in the Premier League, at Aston Villa, where he stuck around for 11 months and didn't get relegated, so what on earth is he doing in this 7? Well, Gerrard replaced Dean Smith at Villa Park in November 2021, with Villa sat 16th in the Premier League table. Following the January arrivals of Philippe Coutinho and Luca Dean, amongst others it should be said, Villa ended up finishing 14th. So far, so mediocre. After his first pre-season though, and yet more really formidable reinforcements like Boubacar Kamara and Leander Dendoncker, Villa were 17th when Gerrard was sacked earlier this season after 11 games, having amassed only 9 points all season, just 1 more than Leicester in 20th. The final straw was a spiritless 3-0 defeat to Fulham. Unai Emery is a quality manager, and naturally Gerrard is going to rank poorly when compared with him, but the reality is that Villa should never have been in a relegation scrap this season, and I think that even a lot of the other regularly cited terrible Premier League managers like René Meulenstein or Pepe Mel wouldn't have had them down there. Villa are now 7th in the Premier League table, 30 points above bottom rather than 1, 15 ahead of Chelsea, 2 behind Liverpool, and tied on points with Tottenham. And if it wasn't for Gerrard's time at the club this season, they would be in Champions League contention. 5th, John Carver. There are some Premier League managers, like Jan Siewert in fairness, who inherit pretty disastrous circumstances and struggle, understandably so. The mark of a really bad manager is surely doing just as badly, but with a squad that is illustrated, that they are capable of winning games. And that's exactly what John Carver did at Newcastle United in the 2014-15 season. Not an interim manager, before anyone says it, otherwise he wouldn't have featured, but rather someone who was put in temporary charge of Newcastle United for half a season, and yes, there is a difference. Newcastle were 10th in the Premier League table, 10 points clear of the drop and just 7 off the top 4, when Alan Pardew decided to leave Newcastle mid-season in order to take charge of Crystal Palace. The previous month, Pardew had been named as Premier League Manager of the Month, and Newcastle had already won games that season against Tottenham, Liverpool and Chelsea. Enter stage left, John Carver, a former Newcastle United academy player who was released by the club at 16 years old and spent most of his career playing for Gateshead, whose only previous non-interim experience in first-team management was a season at Toronto FC in the MLS. Out of a possible 57 points up for grabs over the remainder of the campaign, Newcastle won just 13 under Carver. They won 3 out of their remaining 19 games, going on one of the longest losing streaks in the history of the Premier League, and going on to finish just 4 points above the relegation zone, and a whopping 31 off the top 4. That didn't stop Carver from describing himself as the best coach in the Premier League, with just 3 games to go, a comment which he later claimed had been taken out of context. He's lucky he's only 5th. 4th, Bob Bradley. A man who did more damage to America's reputation abroad than the Bay of Pigs invasion and the January 6th Capitol attack combined, Bob Bradley seems almost fictional, and his time at Swansea like something that you might have imagined in a dream, but I can assure you that he is very much real. Bradley never played football, but began his journey in coaching with the Ohio Bobcats college team at the age of only 22. Between then and taking over from Francisco Guidolin at Swansea City, Bradley managed the United States and Egypt's national teams, won 2 MLS Coach of the Year awards, and honed his skills in Europe with Stabæk and Le Havre. He was primed for a shot at the Premier League then, becoming the first American to be given that opportunity when Swansea City appointed him in October 2016. The Swans were 17th at the time, just 7 games into the season, and they hoped that Bradley could be the man to turn their faltering start to the campaign around. He wasn't. In fact, he wouldn't even see out 2016. Bradley won 2, drew 2, and lost 6 of his 10 games in charge of Swansea, a run which included crushing 5-0, 3-0, and 4-1 defeats against Tottenham, Middlesbrough, and West Ham United. By the time that he was sacked, on December 27th, only goal difference kept them off the foot of the Premier League table, and they were 4 points from safety. Bradley was replaced by Paul Clement, who was viewed as a slightly left-field appointment at the time, but was able to turn Swansea's fortunes around. He won 9 out of his 18 games in charge and only lost 8, guiding Swansea to a 15th place finish, 7 points above the drop, which looked very unlikely when Bradley departed. Nicknamed Brad Bobley by Soccer AM, in probably the last major cultural contribution that television programme made, Bradley has since returned to Major League Soccer, where no one mocks him for using terms like road game or PK, and he added a 3rd MLS Coach of the Year award at LAFC in 2019. 3rd, Terry Connor. You either haven't got a soul or you're a West Brom fan if you didn't feel a little bit bad for Terry Connor at Wolverhampton Wanderers in the 2010-11 season. Connor had been coaching at Wolves for over a decade and had been the club's assistant manager under Mick McCarthy since August 2008, when he was offered the top job after McCarthy was sacked in late February 2012. There's not much precedent in the Premier League for an assistant manager replacing a sacked manager midway through a campaign and being successful, and Connor was no exception. At the point in which McCarthy was sacked, 25 games into the season, Wolves sat in 18th, but they were tied on points with Queen's Park Rangers and Blackburn Rovers in 16th and 17th, with survival still an eminently realistic prospect. Of his 12 games in charge, Connor won none of them, giving him an overall win percentage of 0%, which is the lowest win percentage possible. I will explain the maths later on. And Wolves only drew 3 games, losing the other 9. That sequence included a 5-0 defeat to Fulham, as well as defeats against relegation rivals Bolton Wanderers and Blackburn Rovers, both of whom were ultimately relegated alongside Wolves. From being tied on points with the 2 teams above them, and in the bottom 3 only on goal difference when Connor arrived, Wolves finished the season dead last, cut adrift at the bottom of the table, with only 25 points to their name, and a massive 12 points from safety, or really 13 I suppose, if one considers their goal difference as well. Following Wolves' relegation, Connor went back to being Mick McCarthy's assistant at Ipswich Town, the Republic of Ireland, Apoel Nicosia, Cardiff City, and most recently Blackpool. 2nd, Nathan Jones. I couldn't quite believe it when Southampton appointed Nathan Jones earlier this season. Not because I think he's a terrible manager, or that he didn't deserve it, no one can question his record at Luton Town, but purely because of how things went for him at Stoke City, and how high the stakes were for Southampton. Jones won promotion from League 2 at Luton and had them top of League 1 before departing, and when he returned, he kept the Hatters in the Championship before taking them into the playoffs on a shoestring budget. With that being said, his time at Stoke City was disastrous, and I know people at Stoke who couldn't quite wrap their heads around how he had been successful at Luton based upon his time at the Bet365 Stadium. We all know how important staying in the Premier League is for football clubs, primarily from a financial standpoint, so replacing Ralph Hasenhüttl with Nathan Jones, I must admit, I found that one to be a real head-scratcher. Southampton were always likely to be in a relegation scrap this season, but with the right management, and possibly even just by sticking with Hasenhüttl, I think it's a fate that they could have avoided. When Jones came in, Southampton were 18th, 2 points above Wolves and Forest, 1 point behind Bournemouth, and 2 behind Leicester, West Ham and Everton. Despite signing a 3.5-year contract at St Mary's, Jones lasted for just 8 games. 7 of those games ended in defeat, the only exception being a 2-1 comeback win away at Everton, courtesy of a couple of stunning goals by Southampton captain James Ward-Prowse. Jones didn't just get terrible results at Southampton, but as with at Stoke, he was also just really rather odd a lot of the time, and fell into the classic failing Premier League manager trap of telling everyone just how brilliant you are. When he was sacked, after 3 months but only 8 games because of the World Cup break, Southampton were bottom of the Premier League, 4 points from safety, and that is where they remain at the time of this recording. First, Frank de Boer. I think that it was ridiculous of Crystal Palace to expect Frank de Boer to transform the way in which Crystal Palace played in a single pre-season, with questionable recruitment, and then to sack him after only 4 games. I also think that Frank de Boer isn't a very good manager, and just as Jose Mourinho described him, he does probably have to go down as the worst manager in the history of the Premier League. Mourinho famously called de Boer that after the Dutchman claimed that it wasn't good for Marcus Rashford to be coached by him, citing de Boer's Premier League record as, quote, 7 matches, 7 defeats, 0 goals. That has now been archived and is frequently cited as being de Boer's actual record, even though it isn't quite true. In actual fact, de Boer only got 4 Premier League matches at Crystal Palace, though it is true that he lost all 4 of them, and that Palace didn't score any goals. De Boer arrived with real pedigree, despite a failed stint at Inter Milan, having won 4 Eredivisie titles in 5.5 seasons at Ajax, and he departed as a broken man who wouldn't work again for over 12 months, eventually taking over at MLS side Atlanta United when he returned. De Boer had a much better win percentage at Atlanta, 56.36%, than he did in the Premier League, 0%, but he has been out of work for almost 2 years since being ditched by the Netherlands at the end of Euro 2020. De Boer was replaced by Roy Hodgson at Palace, who was at that time only 103 years old, and he guided them to a comfortable 11th placed finish, 11 points clear of the drop. That is it for today's video, and my 7 Premier League managers who, I think, on the balance of things, I would say probably did a worse job in the Premier League than Claudio Ranieri. Thank you all very much, as ever, for watching. I hope that you enjoyed it. Hit the like button if that was the case. Let me know your thoughts down below in the comments. And it goes without saying, of course, make sure that you are subscribed and have notifications turned on, both for this channel and my backup channel, both of which should be on your screens now, and to Thogden, the bloody legend. You can also find me on Twitter or on Instagram via the username at HITC Sevens on both, should you wish to do so.